For those who heard my message 2 weeks ago, I talked about the subject of endurance, and especially the idea of focusing on our bigger goals. One reason I'm bringing this back up is that it's important to recognize that even with a focus on what our bigger goal may be, for me in that message, and still today, it's the New York City and Philadelphia marathons, which are in 3 and 5 weeks' time, it can still be a disappointment where we recognize that for whatever reason, we have to put aside some of those smaller goals that would get in the way of reaching those bigger goals. Even though we might be making the more noble and sometimes healthier choices, whether that's out of necessity or other factors, there can still be disappointment in a feeling that we're missing out. Now, in today's message, the subject of authenticity. What does it mean to live an authentic life? Many thoughts can come up on this subject, and one of the most important aspects about authenticity is being true to yourself and your values. The previous example of disappointment can often be stuffed away rather than acknowledged, or it can come out sideways. Or as my grief and loss mentor David Kessler would say, bright-sided. You know, that, well, look on the bright side of things, which can bypass or minimize the emotional process that we might be experiencing, leaving us in a place where our outward appearance isn't matching our inward feelings. And similarly, when it comes down to any behavioral or substance or alcohol use disorder, we are learning the importance of allowing those vulnerable and at times uncomfortable or unfamiliar feelings to be acknowledged by ourselves rather than pushed aside. Leading an authentic life is a recognition that we are in connection to ourselves through our factors or behaviors matching values and honoring the emotional energy that's going on inside of us. Now let's face it, what our behavioral or use disorder did was took us away from the very values that made us who we are. The other cunning aspect of this disease is because it lives in our brain. It has a way of hijacking the brain to make us think that whatever choices that we're making, whatever it's seeking for us to do is actually our idea rather than what our addiction wants for us. Which, as many of you know from some of the lectures I gave, I refer to it as an abusive relationship, a lot of the times due to things like those things that it does to our brain. Living an authentic life means being able to work on paying attention to our values, not the things that our disease is telling us to do, or not the things that our disease says are our values. But again, going back to 2 weeks ago, the why behind the bigger goals is that we set, the ones that we set, not the ones that our addiction tells us to set. In some of the readings we heard before the message, we heard examples of how we recognize the woundedness within us, as well as within this world, and how, such as in the Buddhist mantra based on the prayer of St. Francis, we set an intention of being an agent of love in this world. As we recognize our woundedness with a sense of authenticity, it can lead us to recognizing that woundedness in others. As we recognize our brokenness, inner conflicts, weaknesses, as the Jewish tradition reading spoke about, it can lead us to recognize that in others. And then we can become the agent of love or the agent of empathy, approaching others with a degree of understanding, humility, and honesty, because we have been able to be authentic, open, and honest with ourselves first. If we look at our quest to live an authentic life as a journey, not unlike the hero's journey that Reverend Jack frequently talks about, one vital factor is that we must recognize that we're not on our own in this journey. We have people that we meet along the way that will help us on our quest if we allow them. Also, let us remember that we have the help of whatever our higher power may be, that can be a source of guidance for us as long as we're working on building that relationship with it. It can remind us that it wants something better for us than sometimes we want for ourselves, especially when our thinking gets hijacked by the behaviors or substances that are trying to take our ability to live an authentic life away from us. Our higher power can remind us of the values that are meaningful to us, and even in the roughest times, remind us to seek to make choices to do our best to live into those values without compromise. Our higher power, however, will never take our ability to make a conscious choice away from us. So knowing what is important to you and finding meaning in those things are essential in our ability to connect to ourselves authentically and with honesty, as well as holding ourselves accountable to whatever that source of guidance may be. Whether it's something ethereal, such as God, nature, universe, energy, or whether it's something tangible, such as a recovery home group, or a set of disciplines, such as the Eightfold Path, or even a simple reminder as to what is the next right thing to do. Another lesson in living an authentic life is allowing ourselves to risk becoming vulnerable. Now, this can sometimes feel like the opposite of where addiction in any form took us, as we may have needed to be guarded from people who harmed or threatened us, or to hide the things that we were doing from others. Either way, that shield that we put up didn't protect us, but caused us to be in more fear and insecurity that kept us there, rather than seeking out places and people that were safe. Now, this led us to potentially becoming more reactive and responding out of fear rather than out of our values and authenticity. I'm reminded of a story of a man who, when a terrible tsunami hit, he clung to a tree for dear life, never looking down as he was so high up to avoid the waters that were just flooding in. After some time had passed, he heard people calling out to him, "It's safe to come down now, you can jump." But he refused as he was too scared to let go and to look down. And he'd been so high up in the tree, he was too scared to let go of what had kept him safe for a time, although it was no longer serving him, and it was ultimately harming him. The people were saddened that if he'd only taken that time to look around and look down, he would have seen that the tree was bent down enough that he was now only feet from the ground. Going back to that opening statement, some of our short-term goals had served us for what we thought was a purpose in the past. They may have been quick fixes, maybe to numb out pain, physical or emotional, but over time, they are not necessarily serving us. And it's time for us to begin to get honest about that, to look around as to what the things that could better serve us are, and to start opening our eyes, learning how to trust the people who are calling out to us, who are trying to get us to actual safety rather than continuing to cling to those old mechanisms that can no longer serve us. As we find a new and more authentic way of living, we learn how to find the courage and the freedom to let go of that proverbial tree, and to begin to work on developing the skills to courageously name the things that we know can bring us meaning, and set boundaries around the things that either no longer serve us or have sought to hold us back in order to destroy us. So these are our values, and the values that are life-giving, not life-sucking. And as we name them, we can set intentions to live into them. That is what authentic living looks like. However, it starts with allowing ourselves to begin to get familiar with that idea of vulnerability, including the vulnerability that can come with humility when we learn to risk trusting others, our values, and a source of guidance that reminds us of these values and the bigger goals. Especially at the time when we find ourselves feeling that push away from our values or wanting to go back to hanging on to that proverbial tree. When we remind ourselves of the why of our values, we're reminded that we have accountability, not to anyone else, but to ourselves, to live into those things that want to give us life and that hope, which are found in those values. And that's another reminder right there. It's about doing it for yourself. Someone else may have different values just as much as they may have a different higher power. But if those values are healthy and work for them, then that's the journey they're on. If you are living your life authentically, you will be living by the values you set. You may get some amazing wisdom and insight along the way that informs you, and you may incorporate them into your values. But you're not obligated to take on others' insights or beliefs unless they feel relevant to you. One of my most favorite quotes is from the preface of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and it reads this: "This is what you shall do. Love the earth and the sun and the animals, despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks, stand up for the stupid and the crazy. Devote your income and labor to others, hate tyrants, argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence towards the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air of every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all that you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem, and have the richest fluency not only in its words but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body." That last part, dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem. That is what authentic life looks like. We take what we need and we leave the rest behind, but with humility. We work on acts of kindness, putting love first rather than arguing over petty things. We instead seek to live by our principles and values so that we can become the most authentic and honest person that we can be. And as we're aware, we're human beings. And that leads us to having imperfections that we may struggle with from time to time. Instead of allowing these imperfections to lead us down a road of shame, learning to take these and learn from them will only help us to strengthen our values. And this note, one acronym that I love to say is failure is simply found another important lesson upon reviewing experience. Found another important lesson upon reviewing experience. The only other failure is when we don't allow ourselves to look at what happened, what changes we might need to make, and that we forget to find the important lesson from whatever that experience was. With humility, our imperfections can be looked at, worked on, and taken to a place of healing that can better allow ourselves to much deeper connect to ourselves as well as others. Brené Brown wrote Staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. Now, this sums up what our imperfections can teach us. And you may have heard me say in a previous group or lecture, and another quote that I love is that the opposite of addiction is connection. We need each other to survive. Being around other people who are seeking to live into their authentic selves is going to help draw on our strength and guide us to living into becoming our authentic selves. Finally, authenticity is something that we have to make decisions to live our lives every day. We need to show up. And just like in step 3, it can be a decision by decision quality that requires honesty, trust, openness, an appropriate degree of vulnerability and humility. Directly quoted once more by Brené Brown, she wrote that authenticity is a collection of choices that we have to make every day. It is about the choice to show up and be real. The choice to be honest, the choice to let our true selves be seen. So let me ask you this. How are you going to let yourself be seen today? Are you going to, as the song goes, put your armor on? Or are you going to allow others to see you with the openness and the honesty that gives you freedom of living your life with the authenticity that you deserve? It's time to let go of that tree and join the crowd of supporters that has your back and will embrace you and the authenticity that you will bring along with you. Amen.